just a second. All right. So as Abby said, I'm Sara Fessenden. I'm with Echo Analytical, which is part of the services of Dairy One Forage Laboratory. We're happy to be here tonight to talk a little bit about forage analysis and the importance of taking samples for equine nutrition. So a little bit of a background about us. Dairy One has been testing feed since 1974. Dairy One as a business was started in 1940, initially testing milk for farms, doing DHI testing, and a lot of the components that we use today to measure kind of came out of Dairy One's research and development in that area. And then that's where forage analysis was added to help dairy farmers with balancing their rations and getting a better idea of how to feed their cows. In the 80s, we began offering NIR analysis. So we'll go a little bit into the different types of analysis offered by the lab. NIR is a significant part of our business today. And so I like to kind of point out when we got into the field, we were early adopters of the technology. And so it's been about 30 years of using NIR and adding to our calibrations. In 2004, we branded our Echo Analytical unit. We saw that we were getting an increasing number of samples for equine nutrition, and our reports were geared towards dairy nutrition. So they had a lot of parameters in there that are needed for digestibilities and things that go on in a rumen, which horses don't have. So we wanted to make services that were more geared towards equine nutrition, a little bit simpler to submit samples under, and the reports are geared towards the parameters that you need. So at the lab, we offer a full panel of wet chemistry services. So this is your traditional chemistry. You'll also hear it called reference chemistry. These are what NIR calibrations are based on. To do wet chemistry, we have to take a sample and break it down to get to the component that we're looking for. So for fiber, you're trying to remove all your carbohydrates, your sugars, your ashes, and get to the fiber, and then vice versa for all the other components. So generally for wet chemistry, you'll see that take a little bit longer and costs a little bit more. We have to handle the sample quite a bit more, and it involves a lot of chemicals, buffers, and equipment in the lab. NIR stands for near infrared reflectance spectroscopy. This is our most common service. We see about 70% of our samples coming in requesting this, and then we scan about 90% of our samples with it to always add to our database. So the way that NIR works is it takes a scan of the sample, so it's non-destructive, and we get about 32 components back in a 90-second scan. So this really helps get results back to the customer as fast as possible. NIR relies on using wet reference chemistry to build the calibration data set. So it's really robust for common feeds like hay, haylage, corn silage, the common things that we see fed to horses and cows. So this is something that we highly recommend using if you want to get your samples quickly and in a budget efficient manner. NIR does operate on the organic activity of the sample, meaning if you have concerns about your mineral levels or there's a high level of ash in the sample, that will interfere with how well NIR can perform. So if you have concerns about minerals, we always recommend supplementing your NIR analysis with wet chemistry minerals. We also do water analysis, manure analysis, and soil analysis. I like to highlight these because even though they seem like a one-off service, they are really important for getting the entire picture of what's happening for your horse's diet. Specifically for water, there's a high level of minerals that are found in those. And so we have a livestock suitability test that can tell you what your mineral levels are, your pH, hardness, and anything else that might affect your horse's intake. Especially as we're moving into summer, we know how important it is to get water into your critters. So making sure that they want to drink that water is highly important. Manure analysis can also give you a picture of how well they're digesting. And if you pair that with a nutrition analysis on the feed, it might give you an idea of if your feed is too high on some components and it's just going right through the horse, or if maybe they need a little bit more of others. Soil analysis we see as being useful if you're looking to supplement your pasture to get some better grass off of it, or even for hay ground if you're looking to get a better hay harvest. The next area I wanted to focus on is taking a sample. As a lab, the part that causes the most variation in your sample results is taking a sample, and that's the part we don't control. So I like to focus on that, especially with equine, as a hay sample is going to be representing the bulk of your horse's diet. We do strongly recommend taking any hay samples using a hay probe. I'll even say it's the only way to take a hay sample. I know they can be a pain to use and they can be a cost, but we always like to recommend working with either your nutritionist, your feed dealer, or your cooperative extension to see if they can come out and help you take a sample. I compare taking a sample with a hay probe similar to if you're walking in the woods and you're asked to say what you saw in the woods, what were the plants, what were the trees, and you just look at the one next to you and you say, this is a birch tree. All of these woods are birch. You can only get birch products out of this forest. But that's not going to give you the full picture. You're missing things like the pine trees, the maple trees, the moss, all those important things that make up the entire forest. So similar to if you aren't using a hay probe and you're just taking a grab sample or even just part of one leaf of one bale, you're not getting a full idea of what's going on with all your hay. So when you use a hay probe, you're able to core across one bale and then collect from multiple bales of that load and send it in. You get an average that would tell you what your whole load of hay looks like. I also compare it to if you walk out into a hay field, does the whole hay field look completely identical? Generally, no, not in this neck of the woods. So this is helping capture that variation and give you an idea of what your hay looks like. Similarly, with a pasture sample, you want to go out there and take 12 to 20 grab samples, cutting the grass where the horses are grazing to. So you don't want to pull up the root. You want to take a little clipping above. And for pasture samples, we also recommend freezing them if it's not going to be coming in the same day, because that'll help with any sugar degradation and the breakdown of the sample. If this seems like a lot of information on how to take a sample, the very important part, we also have these resources on our website. So this is just a quick screen grab I took off of our website showing how to take a hay sample, and further down this same page, we also have how to take a pasture sample. So again, this is the most important part of getting your analysis, and taking a sample is crucial for balancing your horse's diet. You'd want to eliminate the guesswork, and getting the proper sample is the most important first step to getting that. So then once you have your perfectly gathered sample, you want to get the sample to us. So we receive our samples through a multitude of ways. You can bring it directly to us. Our lab is in Ithaca, New York. We also have a sample transportation network, which is on our website. If you have questions about that, I can happily direct you to the nearest stop to your location. We also receive things through all the different carriers. We always say, select your carrier at your own risk. We've all had different disruptions with different carriers. So if you're going through USPS, we recommend getting that certified to make sure you know your sample gets to us. We also have a UPS label printing service on our website that will get you a discounted shipping rate. And then we also do FedEx, DHL, pretty much anything you can think of. So you can see on the right there, we have our bags of sample. I like to use this picture because it shows the proper sample size to be sending us. About a quart size bag is how much we like to see, or about half full if you can't get that many hay probes into a bale. When we do see a larger sample and that requires more grinding on our part, we tend to apply a extra handling fee. So to avoid that, we like to recommend a quart size bag or about half full if necessary. And if you have too small of a sample, we won't have enough to analyze, especially if you're getting wet chemistry, because that does destroy the sample. A note for alfalfa hays. I know those aren't as common as a pure alfalfa hay fed to equine, but we do grind grind alfalfa hays in their entirety. So especially if you're sending a larger sample, that can result in an extra handling fee. So when the samples arrive at the lab, we we dry all of our wet samples that arrive in our ovens at 50 degrees Celsius for a minimum of about 4 hours. After they are dried in the ovens, they go into our grinders that you can see on the right. So we also have that for any hay samples coming in, those go directly to the grinding room. So to do any of our analytical steps, we grind everything down to a 1 millimeter grind. That's our standard across all labs. So if you have questions that using a hay probe might make your sample too small, that's pretty impossible because we take it even smaller. So then I wanted to talk about NIR analysis. So this is again, one of our more common or most common services. So there on the right, you can see the sample is in a fine powder and we pack that into the sample disc that you can see there. And that goes into the instrument that you can see on the left, and the sample passes through there, and in about 90 seconds, we get back all the constituents. We do have a quality control measure that all results are then sent through our team of editors to take a look at, make sure everything lines up, and then the results go out twice a day. So typically, if you send us a sample for NIR, you'll get your results back same day or next day. I wanted to go through a couple of our wet chemistry areas. I won't cover the entire lab, but our most common ones, especially for equine customers. So minerals is a huge area for this because, as I said, NIR is a little lacking for precise NIR or precise mineral analysis. So we always recommend wet chemistry if that's an area of concern. So for wet chemistry minerals, we do have to break the sample down all the way to the inorganic compounds, the ash and the minerals. So we do that through heat and acid digestion. You can see some of the acid digestion there on the left. And then after that, we take that subsample on the right and we run it through our ICAP instrument that takes part of the sample and shoots it through this plasma spectrometer, takes a scan of it and lets us know about 14 different minerals. And so while that's also a fast process, it takes a little while to break down the sample. So for minerals, we generally say expect 2 days from receipt of the sample to get your results back. The other common services that we see for equine customers are sugars and starch, especially for horses with metabolic challenges. We have ESC and WSC for sugar. So that's your water soluble carbohydrates and your ethanol soluble carbohydrates. Ethanol soluble carbohydrates are more common for our dairy customers, while on the equine side, you do still want to use the water soluble carbohydrates, so you're capturing that fructan piece that is normally removed with ethanol soluble carbohydrates. And then starch is also important, especially for any customers with concerns about laminitis. So we have our wet chemistry methods to ensure your starch levels are where your concern might be. And on the reports, we also make sure to highlight those. And if you are specifically worried about your carbohydrates, we have a package just for carbohydrates that will test these for you. And if you want the more complete analysis, those are all included in NIR, and NIR does a really good job on measuring sugar and starch. So how do you get your results? We prefer to send everything by email. So when you send in your sample using our submittal form, there's a spot there to fill in your email, or if you have an account with us, your account will be associated with an email. We also can mail you a copy, but that is at an extra charge. And then I like to highlight putting those results to work. So when you get your sheet back, there's going to be a lot of abbreviations there and numbers that you might not be familiar with. So I always point people towards our website. We have some resources up there under our resources tab for how to interpret your results. This page I took a screenshot of, I find very helpful for what all the different abbreviations mean. And then we also have our interactive feed library. This is a really great tool for customers that aren't used to seeing a lot of feed analysis. So it's a tool you can go in and play around with, but this is something that we're really proud to give to the industry for free. And it takes everything that we've analyzed and lets you know what average values we've seen. And so you can take a look at your report, take a look at the feed composition library and see where your sample falls. We don't have an interactive tool that you can, upload yours and compare it side by side. But if you're looking at the report and you're looking at this, you'll get a good idea. And on the left of this screen, you can see that you can select it by hay, fresh forage, grain, water, manure. And then our kind code will break it down by type of hay. So you have your grass hay, legume, timothy, various things, and then break it down by year. So you can even see how your hay is performing this year, or even what averages looks like over the past few years in case you're thinking about drought conditions or something repeating. It might give you an idea of what happened in the past. I do like to add the caveat with this that I wouldn't use this library to balance any of your diets with. It is still really important to test your hay and know specifically what you're feeding. This is good to compare it to, but I wouldn't recommend using this in place of an analysis to balance your diet. So talking about balancing your diet, we work with Feed Excel. They're a horse nutrition calculator that you can upload our analysis into, and then you can put in things like your horse's breed, age, activity level, any concerns you have. You can put in your grain mix, your water analysis, and it will help you balance your diet. We of course recommend working with your nutritionist or your vet, but I think this is a really great tool so you're hands-on and getting to know what your analysis means and how to balance your horse's diet. And this also has some good tools for looking at what typical weights you might see out of certain breeds and ages. And we have that on our website as well. And that's all based on the NRC requirements. So that's it I have for slides. I am very happy to engage more. If you have questions you want to ask outside of the talk, I'll leave my email up here for a moment so that you can copy that down. And then I'll probably get out of my screen share so that I can see the chat and if anyone has their hands raised. I hope this was useful. And again, if you have any questions that you don't want to bring up now, please feel free to email me. I'm always happy to engage. And I'll also put my email in the chat in case anyone wants to copy and paste it out of there.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute or post those questions in the chat.
Oh, we have a couple questions coming in. Asking about what each analysis costs. I'm bad, I don't have this memorized. That is on our website and I can pull it up really fast. So our NIR packages for your basic one will be about $19. To add in the wet chemistry minerals puts you at $30. And if you don't trust NIR, you can get the full wet chemistry package. I will say I trust NIR. I've fed cows in the past off of NIR, so I will always say that you can use it, especially for common hays. But if you want to use full wet chemistry, you're looking at about $70 to $90 for that. Another question we had was providing ration balancing help to clients. We don't offer any sort of recommendations or specific to your case, but if you want help walking through your specific analysis, we're always happy to kind of guide you through what you see and what we might typically see on those values. We do recommend working with your vet or nutritionist or using the software I talked about because each case is individual, and my history is as a dairy nutritionist, and seeing the animals, seeing what's going on and the whole picture is really crucial for making any ration decisions. So trying to do that based off of just the analysis is a really tough position. And I wouldn't want to make a wrong recommendation, but I'm always happy to help interpret the analysis and what that looks like. Any other questions? There's no such thing as a stupid question, I promise.
Any other questions for Sara? If not, if you think of anything, feel free to post it in the chat, or Sara put her email in the chat as well. But thank you very much, Sara, for the first half of our presentation. So for the second half, we have Lynn Bliven that will be speaking. So I can go ahead and introduce her at this point. So Lynn is the Agriculture and Natural Resources Issues Leader with CCE Allegheny County. She began her career working as a 4-H agent and is currently working in agricultural economic development, specializing in beginning farmer outreach, local food systems, and livestock production. Lynn and her husband, Sean, operate a 52-acre farm in Rushford, New York, raising registered Hereford cattle, Katahdin sheep, along with their 4 pleasure horses. So we welcome Lynn at this point. So thanks, Lynn, for presenting tonight.
Great, Abby. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks, Sara, for the starting things off for us tonight. And she did offer to stick around a little bit, so hopefully everyone is. Am I sharing the right side of my screen? You're seeing the presentation.
It's good.
Okay. Sorry, when you have 2 screens, it's always hard to know which one is projecting, and want to make sure we have things in the right avenue. So, okay. So we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about equine forage and some of the other ways that we might use for evaluation. So depending on the use of the classification of the horse you have, 50% up to 100% of the horse's nutrition can be supplied from forage. So, and when we're looking at calculating horses' ration, we're usually calculating that based on the fact that they'll eat about 2.5% of their body weight per day on a dry matter basis. So when we're looking at feeds, Sara talked about the drying things down in order to test it. When we're looking at analysis and balancing rations, we're doing that on a dry matter basis. And that's going to vary depending on the type of forage you're using, the forage quality. So when we're looking at this, we're thinking about what the quality of hay can be measured in terms of qualitative or quantitative characteristics. So the qualitative characteristics are things that can be assessed by visual appraisal. The quantitative are the characteristics about the chemical makeup, which is what we talked about with the forage analysis. When we look at it, the size, the shape, the weight of the bale doesn't determine or impact the quality. And so that's something a lot of times we'll get questions about, feed quality based on the type of bale. Again, that's that if you have properly harvested and stored hay, it's really going to retain its quality. The hay may lose a little bit of its color and some of the vitamin A in storage, but otherwise, if it's stored correctly indoors under good conditions, it can be stored pretty much indefinitely without losing a significant amount of the nutrient content. So there are 2 primary factors that influence forage quality: nutritional concentration and the nutrient digestibility. And both of these are heavily influenced by the stage of maturity of the plants that we're harvesting. And most of the highly digestible nutrients in the forage are going to be present in the leafy parts of the forage. So we're looking at this kind of bar chart here. We can see stage of harvest is the dark blue, and leafiness, the kind of the teal color there, I guess. So it's a large percentage of how we're figuring out the value of our forages. So the stage of harvest, again, that refers to the plant stage of development when we're cutting it for forage. We consider that, again, an important factor. With grass hay, it's relatively easy to evaluate the stage of harvest. Grass should be cut in like a boot or the early seed head development. The quality of the grass, does have, won't have as many seed heads at that point. If you're looking at things like clovers, we're going to cut those between 20 and 50% of bloom stage. And again, it's pretty easy to observe that as we look across the field if you're making your own hays. So forage in the vegetative state will not have a lot of visible seed heads. So the picture there to the left of the screen, you can see that there's not a lot of seed heads. There's not a lot of flowers in that. Again, the stage of maturity of the plant is not related to a particular cutting, but rather to the stage of maturity. So that picture is actually of a second cutting hay, but again, it's very leafy, very early stage. The ratio of the leaves to stems provides, again, a visual measurement of the maturity, and it can be, that can be used to estimate the digestibility and nutrient content when we're comparing loads of hay. But again, forage analysis obviously is going to give us a definitive number. But the degree of maturity can also be estimated by the appearance of the seed heads in the grasses and legumes. So if we look at the pictures in the center there, try to get my pointer here. So this sample here, we have, some pretty late stage. We're seeing quite a bit of bloom there. You can see the length of the seed head. So this is kind of a clover grass hay. This is actually second cutting. And again, you can tell this is a little bit late in being harvested, a little bit more stem area, and then more stem to leaf ratio. Over here, we can see we've got a little bit of seed head. There is some, but this is an earlier cut, early maturing. So there's a lot more leaf to stem ratio on that particular hay sample there. Again, some of the other things that we would consider would be the color, the odor, or the softness of the hay. Color, again, the most desirable hay is going to be bright and kind of a natural green color. Color can sometimes be an indicator of how the hay was handled in the field, how it was cured. If the hay was rain damaged, if it was in the field too long, you can get sun bleaching. You may actually see mold or heat damage, which will create an off color. Yellowing, especially in grasses, is often an indicator of over maturity. When I talk about the bleaching there, bleaching would be a little bit different than like a bale bleaching, where you might get, hay bales that are stored and the outside of the bale is just bleached from the sun. That's a little different than if we're talking about where it was damaged in the field. So you may have to sort through some bales if you're getting a load or you're going to, use that as a visual appraisal, because color alone is a poor indicator of forage quality. If you take an example, you might have a bale with a lot of weeds in it. The weeds may be very green, however, they're going to be lower in nutritional composition than, say, a purebred or pure bale of like an alfalfa hay, which may be browner in color but still have higher nutritional value. So odor is another indicator. The smell, obviously hopefully you've experienced that smell of fresh mowed hay or new hay bales being put in the barn. Thinking about that, that's the first thing that the animal does, is they're going to smell their food. So odor is a primary reason for animal rejecting a forage. And so certainly we want to make sure that we're selecting forages of good quality. As odor can also be an indication of mold and mildews, and that would be something we would want to avoid. So you look at this stack here, and it may be a little bit hard to tell, but you can see kind of these darkening lines here. This was a barn that I went into, and they were having some trouble with hay storage, and actually the moisture content of the hay was too high when it was put up. And these are actually bales of bales, so they had 9 small bales that were baled into a cube. And essentially there wasn't enough area. They did use a little salt, but not enough. And so that hay, for the most part, it went right through those core bales and again into those bundles. And all of the hay was not of value, very dusty. There was a little bit of mold, but mostly just the dust factor, that it was, certainly not going to be suitable for horse hay. This here is a third cutting bale of hay. And again, it might be a little bit hard to see, but this is kind of compacted here. And so we have some dust issue in this bale. Again, not mold, but a little bit too higher moisture content. And so something that you would want to be concerned about. The flip side of that leaf of hay, it looks like it's very nice. It's very soft to feel. So it would be very palatable from that perspective. But we did have a little bit of dust as a result of too much moisture, a little bit a heavy level of clover in that particular bale, and it just didn't dry well in that spot. Here's another example, and this bale actually had been dripped on, but you can see that just the discoloration, that would be an indication of moisture. You might also see this kind of yellowing color if uniformly throughout a bale of hay, if the hay itself had been rained on in the field. Again, as I said here, this was just an example of a bale I had that had actually been leaked on. So just a couple of flakes of the hay were damaged, and the rest of the bale looked nice and green and fresh, like this over here. Looking at some of these examples, you can see a little bit more coarseness in this hay. So this is not going to be as soft. It may be a little bit less palatable, particularly if you have, for more sensitive animals. They might not want to consume it. Again, some of this hay over here is, again, we're seeing a little bit more stem to leaf ratio. Not that that hay might not be well suited for particular animals that maybe don't need as high nutrition, because it still is, good color, and there was no odor or dust to this particular sample. This sample here, again, it's a little bit hard to see, but that's actually white mold developing. This is on the outside of a round bale. You would need to open that up. Perhaps it's just from it sitting on the ground, but it might be an indicator of that hay being put up a little bit too wet with a little bit too much moisture. And certainly if that mold is through the bale, rather than just on the outside layer from sitting on the ground, we wouldn't want to feed that to our horses. So that would be a hay product to avoid. So these are the 5 factors, again, that we might look at on the plus side, to kind of give us an evaluation or a score for the hay. But there are also some things that we might consider as far as the negative side. And so something else when we're looking at buying hay is, what is the bale? Is it uniformly contain the type of forage combination, whether it's a legume or grass or a mix? Does it have a quality forage throughout? You might literally have issues with, trash in a bale. So this is a sample bale. There's actually some plastic here. There's also some weeds in it. This was baled out of a field that from a farmer I purchased from, and it's near a roadway. And so I do have to be careful with the bales that come off the outside edge of that field, because often there's trash, literally garbage in it. And so you do want to be careful of that. Whereas this particular example over here, we've got some raspberries and some, had some multiflora rows in it. Not real comfortable to handle those kind of things. So again, and that's certainly not something the animals are going to eat, and it's going to detract from them. Not that the rest of this forage is not quality, but that's something that you want to consider when you're evaluating if it's the type of hay that you want to purchase or not. Some of the other things that we might consider is, certainly there are some weeds that we need to be concerned about from the perspective that they may be poisonous or detrimental to the animal's health. In many cases, though, what we might consider a weed can be fairly nutritious. And so again, going back to having a forage analysis, there may be weeds that if it's not poisonous to any animal, they may well contain some good nutrients for them. And if you're feeding something like alfalfa, we can have trouble with insects or like the blister beetle in alfalfa. So for pleasure horses, we're probably not looking at pure alfalfa hays. So this point system that we can use is, again, it's just a way to maybe evaluate factors. And so we can compare the type of selection of hay that you have available to you and see which might be the best value for your individual situation. So with this system, again, I said that, the two things that were most important were the stage of harvest and leafiness, because that's where our nutrients are going to be. Upwards of 80 or 90% of the nutrition is going to be in the leaf area. Most of the vitamins and minerals are there. So really, that's why we're weighting that so heavily. And then things like the color and odor, because those may, and softness, those all may have to do with palatability or acceptance by the horse. So we give them a value. And then, as I said, we're going to take away for, if there's a high amount of trash or weeds that are not going to be consumed, we have to subtract that out of the value of the bale that we'd have to feed. So here are just a couple examples. There's a large square bale there at the top, and that was a third cutting hay. It was harvested at the right stage, very leafy, good color. It smelled nice. It was soft to the touch, and there was very little weed or trash in those particular bales. So I would score that pretty high as far as the value. On the bottom sample there, we're just looking at this individual flake of hay that's sitting there. It was harvested a little bit later stage. This is also a second cutting hay. If we kind of get in there, so it still looks pretty leafy, but as you feel that bale, it's a little bit, it's not quite as soft. It still has some good color to it. It smelled really sweet, and it didn't have too much in it, but it did have some thistle in it. Nothing, again, that would be of concern to feed the horses, but certainly that, again, not something that they're not going to eat. So again, when we're looking at this, obviously, if you're buying in hay, requesting a forage analysis when you're purchasing it is helpful if your hay dealer makes those available. Not all of them do, but that's going to really make it easier for you to match the nutrient requirements of the horse and satisfy their grazing needs while you're working on, maintaining that proper body condition and limiting the number of other supplements and grains. Again, forages generally are going to be less expensive than other inputs to feed our animals. And the cost of the hay per ton or per bale may not be the sole indicator of value. Again, you really kind of need to, as Sara mentioned, these are very individual basis. You need to determine the value that's best for your situation. So if you look at the samples here, again, with these two bales, actually the price per ton for the large squares was less than the price per ton on these small square bales. However, if you can't handle those large bales, that kind of takes that opportunity out, even though it might be a better choice for you. Or conversely, if the nutritional value of that large square is going to be higher than those smaller square bales, and perhaps that nutrition level is too high for the horse that you're trying to feed, and you're going to have a lot of nutrients passing through manure, or having to deal with a horse that's being that's overweight, or limiting the forage availability, trying to control weight, which may create some other behavioral issues. So again, it's kind of a balance point that we want to put into that as well. But this point system may, give you a little bit of a basis comparing load to load or type of hay that's available in your area. So again, a visual appraisal, the other thing I want to add with this is it's very subjective. So no two people will evaluate the same hay exactly the same way. And so it might be difficult to communicate that as far as description, or what the seller may be sharing with you may be different than what your perception is. Even though visual appraisal is kind of quick and it's inexpensive, to look at the color and the texture and the odor, it doesn't necessarily relate to the nutrient composition. You really need to do that chemical analysis. Again, you can get some estimates if you're trying to make a decision, or and need to make a decision before you can purchase it and actually get it analyzed. This visual appraisal or this type of system can help you in that, and then following up with the analysis and then balancing your ratio from there. The other issue that can't be evaluated unless the hay has been sampled and analyzed is the hay of higher nutritional composition, should be worth more, because you're buying the nutrients. When we're looking at that, we're not necessarily, we're purchasing a bale of hay, but the purpose of purchasing that is to provide the nutrients that our horses need. The other thing that's helpful is when we look at it is being able to purchase hay. We should be trying to purchase hay based on weight rather than volume. If you have that opportunity, that also makes it a little bit easier to compare. So if we're comparing, 40-pound bales to a 700-pound bale, we need to have a price per ton or per pound to compare those, rather than, obviously bale to bale is not going to work. And it's important to have some idea what that hay weighs, because we also want to feed our animals based on weight, not volume. And, so if you look at, again, the difference between buying, say a 60-pound bale of hay or an 80-pound bale of hay, that can increase the cost by a third if you're not aware of how much, that bale weighs. So here's just a forage analysis, and this is actually a little bit different than I think the one that Sara was talking about. I just wanted to bring it back up as I pulled this off. Regardless of the form of the forage or how it appeals to us when we look at it visually, or it smells nice or it feels nice, in order to really know what the nutrient composition is, we need to have that forage analysis done. And that's really going to help us in order to be able to balance a ration for the individual animal that we're trying to match their needs with. With that, there's any questions?
If you have any questions for Lynn, feel free to just unmute yourself or put them in the chat.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions, but we'll certainly keep it open here for a bit. And Sara also was willing to take some additional questions. A lot of times we do these programs, and it often seems that we are saying it depends. So there aren't really a definitive, one answer that fits in each scenario. But I will share that if you're not sure how to do things, as Sara mentioned, taking a proper soil or forage analysis. Many of your cooperative extension offices actually do have those forage probes available for you to borrow, and they may well have time to come out and show you how to take that sample so that you're getting a good sample in order to get a fair analysis. And then when it comes to balancing rations, we can work with you on that. Again, there's not a right or wrong feed, as long as there's, we're avoiding things that are moldy or, can cause health issues. There may be I'll share my example. My horses are predominantly pasture decorations. And so they do very well on a first cutting late cut hay. It allows them to have free choice hay. And I don't have to worry about them getting too heavy on that. But certainly if I were to turn around and then want to, work those horses, 4 to 5 days a week, I might need to do something a little different. So it's really about matching what your horse needs with what's available in your area.
I'll also add, I had a question come in while Lynn was talking about if we take international samples, specifically from Canada, and we have a permit on our website. So if anyone else has a concern about sending a sample from Canada, we can definitely get that across the border. And then we also have a network of affiliated labs that we work with that have our NIR calibrations. So if you want to send it to someone local, but still get that NIR database that we've been building for 30 years. We have a few locations around the world, and those are also on our website. And if you have a specific question, feel free to shoot me an email about that.
Well, great. Thank you again, Sarah. Appreciate you joining us this evening. I want to thank Abby for all of her efforts behind the scenes to get this series off the ground and get things started for us. This is kind of a new project for our livestock PWT. And for those of you participating or that view the recording, please feel free to contact one of us and let us know if there are other topics that you would be interested in having some presentations on. We're looking for ideas on how to expand offerings to equine owners in the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you guys for having me. I think this is a really great resource, and I think cooperative extension is one of the great things about the Cornell team and everything they can do. It's no small thing to have a group that's there just as a resource and helping make the most out of everyone's farm, whether it's a full-size dairy farm or a hobby farm. So no, thank you guys for what you do, and I was really happy to participate today.
Yeah, thank you again to Sarah and Lynn. And yeah, like Lynn said, thank you all for joining us, whether you just joined in today or you watched one of the other two presentations that we had before this. And we will be sending out the recording for this presentation, so you can feel free to go back and watch that again. Oh, we did just have one more question roll in. So Holly asked if you can use the forage probe for small bales.
Certainly, the forage probe will work regardless of the size of the bale. And so if you don't have a probe, Holly, I'm not sure which county you're in or which area you're in, but we certainly can try to connect you with the resources if you need to. Columbia County, okay.
Yeah, I'd say using a hay probe on a small square bale is going to be the easiest one to use it on. I've used them on a double compressed bale that you get, those are for exporting. That takes a bit more arm muscle, but a small square bale will be perfect. You just want to make sure it's backed up against something when you're trying to push into it with the probe. And Holly asked if you should sample several bales. Absolutely. We say about 12 to 20 or whatever is representative of the entire load you have. Sorry, I didn't say that in my spot, but it's also on our website if you need a refresher.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for mentioning that. And perhaps I know that link was in there, and I think Abby sent another link. We could probably share those again. And if folks are looking for resources as far as the nutrient requirements, we can certainly help share that information as well.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend. I feel bad to keep plugging the website, but we have tried our very best to put as many resources on there as possible. So looking through at what's available, what's going to be guidelines, and then also just useful things, anything from good pasture practices, NRC requirements, so what you typically see for different species and age and activity, and then putting your results to work. Try to make it kind of a one-stop shop.
Does anyone have any last questions for Lynn or Sarah?
Just trying to look at, I know Steve Hadcock is in Columbia. area. I was trying to look for Holly's connection there, but maybe just put, I'll share the CCE link for them, Holly, and then if you have questions or can't get the right person, since I'm not having good luck going there quickly.